Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Reopening Alabama, a mayoral town hall series presented by AARP of Alabama. I'm your host, Ivana Hrynkiw, and today I am joined by the Mayor of Montgomery, Mr. Steven Reed. Now, Mayor Reed, thank you so much for joining us. We know that our viewers and our audience have a lot of questions for you, especially after your announcement yesterday about your executive order requiring masks in the city of Montgomery.
Well, listen, thank you for having me. I'm glad to join you, and I look forward to talking with your viewers and answering any questions that they may have, and just sharing some of the good news that we have going on in Montgomery as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Now, first, we're going to bring on one of our audience members. Her name is Renee, and Renee has a question for you regarding restaurants.
Hello, Mayor Reed. I want to thank you first for everything that you are doing for the city of Montgomery, especially for the mandate of wearing the face mask in the city of Montgomery. You've been an inspiration for everybody during this crisis. I work in Montgomery, and I'm very concerned about the numbers of outbreaks we've had in the last couple of months. But my question to you today is, many cities are opening their streets for restaurants to place tables outside for their customers. It appears that this has been a very successful trend for some major cities. Would you consider closing some of the city streets to allow restaurants to put tables out on the streets for their customers, giving them a safer environment and also allowing them to profit and hopefully keeping their business open? I know many people still are not comfortable with going inside of restaurants.
Absolutely, we consider that. I was in the restaurant industry for a few years, and actually had our restaurant outfitted with a patio.
Did you hear me?
Have it initially because I love being outside, and my wife and I love doing that anytime we're traveling. And even when we're here, we like to eat outside as much as we can. So I think certainly given where we are right now in this environment, that is a great thing to do. I know Jane Castor has done that down in Tampa. Many other cities have done that. And our president of the Downtown Business Association, Jonathan Ivana, also raised that issue with me last month. So yes, I would certainly be open to it and certainly look forward to doing it and joining everyone to eat outside and supporting our restaurants and our entrepreneurs and small business people who operate them and who've done a great job over these last few months.
Thank you so much for that question, Renee. And I'm with you, Mr. Mayor. I worked in the restaurant business for a while, and there's nothing better than eating out on a patio, except for when it's 100 degrees. But other than that, those patios are definitely profitable and enjoyable. So thank you for that. Now we have another audience member. Her name is Pauline, and Pauline has another question for you regarding something that was happening when you took office.
Good morning, Mayor Reed.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the great job that you're doing. And I too want to say thank you for making masks a mandate here in Montgomery County.
Thank you.
My question to you this morning is, Montgomery was in the process of finalizing a comprehensive plan when you were elected. It's supposed to be submitted soon to the commission for approval. My question to you, will you support the plan and its goals in moving Montgomery and our city forward?
Yes, and we reviewed the plan with our director of planning, Robert Smith here, and we have a 2040 plan that by and large we are right in sync with. There have been a few things that came out of our transition committees that we heard from the community that we want to incorporate in that plan. And I wouldn't say they're minor, but it's maybe 10%. So we're about 90% there on the overall comprehensive plan. And I think once we incorporate some of the things that we heard from the community meetings during my transition phase, we'll be right there and we'll be ready to support it 100% going forward with the Montgomery County, because that is really one of the things that's going to guide us in our decision making as well as our priorities and our allocation of resources as well.
I also had the opportunity to attend some of the community meetings, so I know what you're talking about. Thank you so much for this opportunity this morning.
Thank you for participating. Thank you for your voice and for your ideas. That's what we need more of in government, is to hear from people like yourself to guide us and tell us what we don't know and to tell us how we can perform better. So I thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Pauline. That was great. And I know that, like the mayor said, he loves hearing from people who are involved in the community and keep up with what's happening. We've talked a little bit about the executive order that you signed and you announced yesterday. For some of our viewers who may not be aware, the mayor signed an executive order yesterday requiring masks in the city when there are 10 or more people in a location. And that is after this mask ordinance did not pass through city council the night before. We heard a very moving comment that a lot of people believed was moving from Councilman Pruitt at the press conference yesterday. Now, can you give us a little bit of a recap on what exactly you said at that press conference, what this executive order means, and just for those people who weren't paying attention yesterday or weren't plugged in, just to give an update on what's happening in Montgomery since those coronavirus numbers are rising?
Sure. Well, we've seen a surge in our COVID numbers really since May. And it was something that I mentioned to the council at that time and didn't bring up, before the council. And then after another meeting, I was going to introduce it, but did not have the votes to support it. And I told them that if we didn't see the numbers flatten out a little bit, then I would probably be bringing it back. And before I could bring it back, another councilman decided to sponsor it, which I was totally in support of, Councilman C.C. Calhoun. And he had his own ordinance that tied deadlock 4-4 the night before last at our most recent council meeting. And one of the things that we talked about was really going from encouragement to enforcement, because we have been encouraging masks since probably late March, early April. And we've been trying to display them and wear them as much as we can. And a number of people have been doing them, but just not enough have been following that practice. And once we got more data about our cases and we talked to Alabama Department of Public Health Director Scott Harris and others, we thought we had to move more to an enforcement phase. So what the executive order does is it mandates that if you're in a group of 10 or more people, that you wear a mask if you're out in public. We're asking for our private retailers to help us with this and to help us slow the spread of COVID-19 in Montgomery, as we have surged past both Birmingham and Mobile in number of cases, so that we can get to a point of flattening those numbers, decreasing the amount of hospitalizations, and certainly trying to get back to a point where our economy is fully open. This is not a permanent ordinance. It is temporary through our next council meeting, which will be held on Tuesday, July the 7th. And at that time, we'll get a sense of how our numbers are looking then and whether or not we need to move forward with this same ordinance or one very similar. So the executive order just allowed me to move outside of the council vote to enact this, and it will go into effect on tomorrow at 5 p.m. And again, it's not meant to be punitive. It's not meant to do anything but protect the public health of not only citizens in our community, but many of our frontline workers that are exposed to other people who may be asymptomatic or may be pre-symptomatic even, that are coming in contact with us. So we have to do these things because we're in a public health crisis, and we're seeing the numbers just get to a point that are not sustainable here in the city.
Right. And something that we had a question from Mr. Richardson, Bill Richardson, he says that why did you not include in that executive order for groups of 10 or less? Why is it 10 or more? What is specific about that number?
Well, that number kind of came from the CDC guidelines when we first drafted this. And that was pretty much, any group of 10 or more people. We know that families may get together. We know there may be small groups of people who want to be around one another and that sort of thing. At some point, we could have said everyone, right? But we wanted to try to limit it to mainly groups, because that's when we know there can be more community spread. Now, I think certainly if people are in a group of 5 or 6 or whatever it may be, then it's within the right of those that are in the group to try to police one another, if you will, or to try to encourage one another to wear masks. But we did not want to go down that far. We really thought 10 was enough because those were some of the guidelines that were initially set out by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Got it. And kind of going off that, we have a question from Taylina, and she says, why weren't there policies like this rule on masks or other rules on social distancing put out immediately when the city decided to reopen or when the numbers in the city began to rise steadily?
That's a great question. I think the city of Birmingham and Mayor Woodford and the city council were on top of this real early in our state, and I commend them for it. I brought this up to our city council. Many of them, as was shown even just on Tuesday night, just didn't think that we should go that far. They thought that we should continue to encourage people to wear masks, and they didn't think that we should mandate it. And because of that resistance, we weren't able to build the support to get it passed. And so we just tried to do everything we could through PSAs, through social media posts, through even, working with social media influencers and community leaders to try to get them to share the word and encourage people. But it just did not get us where we needed it to be. And the other thing that we also realized was that in many of our retail establishments, they were not enforcing it. So we wanted to kind of give our retail establishments and our small businesses from big box stores on down some reinforcement mechanisms that they could use for customers that are coming in there, potentially spreading it unknowingly, and certainly protect their employees that are working for them during this time.
What is the enforcement of this ordinance? Is there a fine that will be implemented, or who will enforce this ordinance?
Yeah, the enforcement is there's a $25 minimum fine for it. It can go up, I guess, depending on what someone sees at that time. But our goal was really to make sure that we got people to take this seriously, and we give our organizations, our businesses, a mechanism that they can point to as to why they're asking people to wear masks. We aren't looking for anyone to initiate any confrontations. We aren't looking for anyone to try to force this on someone. But what we're trying to do is let them know this is an ordinance that has been signed into law by the city through July the 7th. It is temporary. It is not hopefully something that we will have to do permanently, but it's something that we need to do right now for the protection of ourselves and the protection of our neighbors and our community.
And it's important to note, too, that July 7th deadline, that's after the July 4th holiday, where it is yet to be seen if people will be gathering and experiencing things like we saw on Memorial Day. Got another question. This is from Dennis on Twitter. And this kind of relates to something that one of the medical professionals who was present at your press conference yesterday afternoon spoke about. And that doctor said, look, if numbers keep rising, this is what the doctor said, I might have to plead for people to stay home and put another stay-at-home order. Now, this question from Dennis kind of hits on that. And he says, why haven't you taken action to close Montgomery back up because of the hotspot status? And he adds, are jobs more important than people's lives?
Jobs are certainly not more important than people's lives. We've continued to put the data over the dollars from the very beginning of this pandemic, and we were one of the first movers in adopting a curfew to try to slow the spread of the COVID-19, as well as many other measures that we took into place. We have not done a shelter in place here because we could not get the regional support for it, and it didn't really make a lot of sense for us to try to do that if surrounding communities were not going to partner with us because of maybe the will not being there in their particular municipality. So that was one thing. The second thing is I don't believe that shutting down the city is an option right now. And I'll emphasize the word right now. I think what we have to do is kind of approach this in phases before we hit the ultimate button, which is everything is closed, because that makes things a lot harder. Not only on our small businesses and entrepreneurs, but it makes things hard on those people who are depending on them for their employment, for their paychecks. And so we want to try to be very deliberate and very cautious about the steps that we take. And for us to do that, we would have to implement essentially a 24-hour curfew, because we do not have the authority as a Class 3 municipality to issue a shelter-in-place order. Jefferson County can do that through its health department. Mobile County can do that through its health department. but there's not another county in the state right now that can do that without the governor's permission. So those are all reasons why we have not moved to a shelter in place. And hopefully we won't have to get to that point, and we can still see some flattening of the numbers and a decrease in our hospitalizations.
Thank you for that, Mayor Reed, and for explaining that a little bit too about the municipalities and the differences in those. We've got two questions in regard to one of our most vulnerable populations right now with the coronavirus, and that is our senior population. First, I'm going to bring on somebody from our presenting sponsor, AARP of Alabama, and she has a question about those seniors.
Great.
Hey, Mary, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a two-part question for you. One, how have senior services been affected in the Montgomery area, and what is being done specifically for seniors to ensure they are receiving what they need at this time?
Thank you so much for your sponsorship, and thank you for your questions. Senior services have been impacted because we've had to close down some of our programs and some of our community centers where they are housed. And so what we tried to do is we tried to take more resources to the seniors as opposed to having them come to some of our public spaces. And what we've been doing over the last few months has been gathering information about whether or not those initiatives we put in place have been effective. Some have, and some we're retooling right now. Our Community Impact Task Force that we set up about 2 months ago, which is comprised of county commissioners, city councilmen, and some of our nonprofit leaders, are helping us identify ways that we can be more impactful with our seniors going forward. Because what we want to make sure we do, whether it's Meals on Wheels or whether it's other programs that are designed to work with our faith-based communities to check on our seniors, is that they are really working and that we're really meeting them where they are. And what we don't want to do is just subscribe to the belief that because we have done it, that it is the only thing that we can do. And so we're constantly retweaking and having conversations about how to be impactful. And we're trying to get more data. Now, there's one place that I would say we're short right now. It is in data and feedback and being able to quantify what group, whether those are people in a specific part of town or those are people of a specific racial background or ethnicity that may need a few more things than some others. We're trying to gather that data now and pull in more of our nonprofit partners and members of our faith community to really help us identify those areas and then to address them with better solutions.
Thank you, Mayor. Let us know how we can support you in that.
Sure will. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Candy. Another question about seniors. I thought this was a really interesting question. This is from Juanita, and she says that people over the age of 65 are typically showing up at the polls for voting more than people in any other age group. And she says with voters set to go to the polls on July 14th for the Republican Senate runoff and again in November for the general election, how can you ensure that registered voters in Montgomery are going to be safe when they cast their ballots?
Well, as a former probate judge and chief election official, I have a lot of confidence in the Montgomery Election Center and the work that they do. And I know that probate judge and his staff have been working on that along with many others across the state, because it's not only something that we're going to have to deal with coming up in the general election, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with in the November election. I'm sorry, the primary election in July and the general election in November. We're going to have to deal with this through the rest of the year, maybe even going forward. So from the city standpoint, I rely on our county counterparts there to be prepared as they have been in the past. And we don't run the elections in Montgomery as a city. The county does, and the office of the probate judge does. And I believe they'll have everything prepared and ready to go.
Got it. Question, you said earlier, we talked about the curfew, and you talked about how Montgomery was one of the early cities to implement a curfew. Question from Jada on Twitter saying that she's seen videos of people out late. And how is that curfew being enforced, and is it being enforced? That's
a great question. It's a great point that was brought up at our city council meeting. It is being enforced. Our policemen and women can't be everywhere at one time. To the degree that they get reports, they try to make sure that they follow up on those establishments. One of the things that I've heard direct feedback from is there's also some push for us to lift the curfew. And we are considering that. We're considering that now that we have the mask mandate in place for the next few weeks, because we put that curfew out to try to stop gatherings of people, because we did not have a mask mandate at that time because we wanted to slow the spread of COVID-19. So now with the mask mandate in, if someone is in a group of 10 or more, then we have that enforcement policy, and we may be lifting the curfew in the upcoming days, because what we've heard from some of our small businesses, in particular those that are in the entertainment industry and in the retail nighttime industry, is that they're being hurt because they have to close at 10 and they are abiding by the curfew. When we have people that are not abiding by the curfew, we try to remind them what the rules are and what the penalties may be and give them a warning. But if we have continued violators of the curfew, as long as we have it, then we're going to make sure that they have to pay that penalty, because there can't be a set of rules for one group and a set of rules for another. So either we're going to have everyone abide by it and we're going to follow up on those reports that we get, or we may be looking again at lifting the curfew to make sure that those retailers who have been doing a great job and working with us have the opportunity to have their establishments open as long as their business license will allow, as long as they follow our mask mandate and our social distancing guidelines.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, I know you're tight on time, but I appreciate you. I feel like we've played rapid fire questions, and I appreciate you doing that with me. I have one more for you, and sure. This is something that I have asked every mayor that's participated in our series so far, and I will continue to ask, and that is, if you had to, what grade would you give Governor Kay Ivey on her handling of the coronavirus pandemic here in Alabama?
I would give Governor Ivey a B. I'll give her a B because I would have liked to have seen, only because I would have liked to have seen us go a little bit long before we reopened. I know there were other parts of the state that were giving her some pushback on that. I know there were a lot of business owners and associations that wanted her to open things back up. I just did not think that we were quite ready to open things up at the time that we did. I respect the governor's decision, and she has to see things from a statewide view versus my perspective as a local leader. But that was just kind of one area where, this were a one of those tests, that was 5 questions. I may have given a check mark there, and that probably would have brought that score down from 100 to an 80. But, I think this has all been a challenge for all of us as leaders at the local, county, and state level. And so we've all been trying to grapple with this. And, we've been learning. It's been a once in a century situation and something that's hit all 50 states at one time. That's never happened before. And we're all trying to improve each day, I think, and serve in our capacity the best we can and make sure we're looking out for the interests of the people. But I think a B is a good grade. I was a B student. So I think I'll take that. And that's probably as good of a grade as somebody in Montgomery probably would give me too. So I think I'll be happy with that.
Hey, I understand. I graduated. I got a 4-year degree with a B. So you know what? That is, it'll get you places in life, y'all.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for your time today and your willingness to come on and answer these tough questions. And we appreciate too our sponsor, AARP of Alabama. And everybody, please come and join us next Thursday at 11 a.m. We will be joined by Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin. So we are looking forward to that next week. Again, thank you so much, Mayor Reed, and everybody else. We will see you next week.
Thank you.